October 3rd, 1987, 2:14 a.m. Detective Ray Barnes was unlocking his apartment door in Queens when he heard footsteps behind him. Slow, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that aren't trying to hide because they don't need to. Ray's hand froze on the doorknob. He'd been expecting this moment for 12 years. Ever since the day he testified against Frank Lucas and walked out of that courtroom with a new identity, a new life, and a promise from the feds. You're safe now. Nobody will ever find you. The feds were wrong. Ray turned around slowly. 3 men stood in the hallway. No masks, no rush, just patience. And the man in the middle, the one Ray hadn't seen since 1975, was someone he thought was still in prison. Frank Lucas stepped forward. His shoes clicked on the tile. He stopped 6 feet away, hands in his coat pockets, face calm as stone. "Hello, Ray," Frank said quietly. "We need to talk." What happened in the next 47 minutes didn't just settle a 12-year-old debt. It revealed something about Frank Lucas that the DEA, the prosecutors, and even Ray Barnes himself had gotten completely wrong. To understand what happened that night in Queens, you need to understand who Detective Ray Barnes was in 1975. He wasn't dirty, not at first. Ray Barnes had joined the NYPD in 1968, straight out of the Army. Vietnam veteran, Bronze Star, 2 tours. He'd seen things in the jungle that made New York City look tame. But Ray had a code. He believed in the law. He believed in justice. That lasted about 6 months. 1960s Harlem wasn't just crime-ridden, it was a war zone, and the cops weren't the good guys. They were an occupying force. Ray watched his fellow officers shake down black businesses. He watched them plant evidence. He watched them take money from the Italian mob to look the other way while Harlem burned. And Ray made a choice. If everyone else was dirty, he'd be dirty too. But he'd be smart about it. By 1972, Ray Barnes was on Frank Lucas's payroll. $2,000 a month, cash in an envelope, delivered to his apartment every first Friday. In return, Ray provided something more valuable than protection: information. When the DEA was planning a raid, Ray knew about it. When a rival crew was cooperating with the feds, Ray knew about it. When Frank's competition was moving product through the city, Ray knew about it. Frank Lucas trusted Ray Barnes completely. And that was Ray's first mistake. January 1975. The feds had been building a case against Frank Lucas for 3 years. They had wiretaps. They had surveillance photos. They had testimony from low-level dealers who'd rolled over. But they didn't have the big fish. They didn't have Frank's organization chart. They didn't have his supply routes. They didn't have proof of his direct involvement. Then Detective Ray Barnes got arrested, not for working with Frank, for something stupider. Ray had been skimming money from the evidence room, $20,000 over 6 months. Not Frank's money, just cash from random busts that nobody would miss. Except somebody noticed. Internal Affairs brought Ray in on a Tuesday morning. They sat him down in a windowless room. 2 agents, one from IA, one from the DEA. They dropped a folder on the table. Inside were photographs. Ray taking envelopes from Frank's courier. Ray meeting with Frank at a diner in the Bronx. Ray warning Frank's lieutenants about upcoming raids. The DEA agent leaned forward. His voice was ice. "You're going to prison for 20 years, detective, unless you cooperate." Ray sat there, staring at those photographs, doing the math. 20 years. He'd be 53 when he got out. If he got out. Cops didn't survive in prison. Dirty cops survived even less. Or he could talk. He could give them Frank Lucas. He could walk away with witness protection, a new name, a new life. It took Ray Barnes 48 hours to decide. Then he made the call. The trial started in March 1975, Federal Courthouse in Manhattan. Frank Lucas sat at the defense table in a tailored suit, his face unreadable. He'd been arrested before. He'd beaten charges before. He wasn't worried. Then Ray Barnes walked into the courtroom. Frank's face didn't change, but his lawyers did. Because everyone in that room knew what Ray Barnes being there meant. Frank had been betrayed by someone inside his own circle. Ray testified for 4 days. He laid out everything: the drug routes from Southeast Asia, the military planes that smuggled heroin in the coffins of dead soldiers, the police and politicians on Frank's payroll, the murders, the money laundering, everything. On the 4th day, the prosecutor asked Ray the question that sealed Frank's fate. "Detective Barnes, in your professional opinion, was Frank Lucas the head of this organization?" Ray looked directly at Frank. "Yes." Frank stared back. No anger, no hate, just something that looked like disappointment. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Frank Lucas was sentenced to 70 years in federal prison. As they led Frank out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he turned to Ray one last time. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. That look said everything. "I'll remember you." The feds moved Ray into witness protection immediately. New name, Stephen Cole. New city, Phoenix, Arizona. New job, insurance adjuster. New life, clean, safe, anonymous. The U.S. Marshals gave him the speech. "As long as you follow the rules, you're invisible. No contact with anyone from your old life. No returning to New York. No bragging about who you used to be. You're Stephen Cole now. Ray Barnes is dead." For 12 years, Ray followed those rules perfectly. He lived in a modest apartment. He went to work. He kept his head down. Every year on the anniversary of Frank's sentencing, Ray would pour himself a drink and remind himself he'd made the right choice. But here's what Ray didn't know. Frank Lucas got out of prison in 1981. Early release for cooperation. Frank had done what Ray did. He'd talked. He'd given up his suppliers, competition, his connections. The feds had used Frank to dismantle the entire heroin network in the Northeast. And when Frank walked out of prison 6 years early, the first thing he did was start looking for Ray Barnes. It took Frank 4 years to find him. 4 years of calling in favors, paying private investigators, bribing court clerks for access to sealed witness protection files. 4 years of patience. When Frank finally got the address, a modest apartment building in Queens registered to a Stephen Cole, he sat on that information for 2 more years. Not because he wasn't sure, because he wanted to watch. He wanted to understand who Ray Barnes had become. Frank had people follow Ray, document his routine, his job, his friends, his life. And what Frank saw surprised him. Ray wasn't living like a man who'd betrayed the most dangerous drug lord in New York. He was living like a man who was still looking over his shoulder. Every day, every night. Ray checked his locks 3 times before bed. He varied his route to work. He never made friends, never dated, never relaxed. Ray Barnes had spent 12 years in prison. He just didn't have bars on the windows. October 3rd, 1987, 2:14 a.m. Frank Lucas stood in that hallway, 6 feet from the man who'd put him behind bars, and said 6 words. "We need to talk." Ray's hand moved toward his waistband. He still carried a gun. Old habits. Frank held up both hands, palms out. "I'm not here for that." "And what are you here for?" Ray's voice was shaking, not with fear, with 12 years of waiting for this exact moment. "To understand," Frank said simply. He nodded to his 2 associates. They stepped back, gave Frank and Ray space. Frank gestured to Ray's apartment door. "Can we talk inside? Or do you want to do this in the hallway where your neighbors can hear?" Ray's mind was racing. This was it. This was how he died. But something in Frank's voice, something in the way he stood there, relaxed, almost casual, told Ray this wasn't a hit. Not yet, anyway. Ray unlocked the door. They walked inside. Ray's apartment was sparse, functional, nothing personal. No photographs, no memories, just furniture and empty walls. Frank looked around slowly. "This is how you've been living?" "I'm alive," Ray said. "That's more than you offered." Frank sat down on the couch without being invited. He looked tired, older. The Frank Lucas from 1975 had been sharp, energetic, dangerous. This Frank looked like a man who'd spent too many years paying for his mistakes. "Why'd you do it?" Frank asked quietly. Ray stayed standing, gun still within reach. "They had me. I was going away for 20 years. "So you saved yourself?" "Yes." Frank nodded slowly. "I did the same thing." Ray blinked. "What?" "I cooperated. 1979. Gave up everyone. My suppliers, my partners, people who trusted me. I did exactly what you did." Frank's voice was flat, emotionless. "So, I can't hate you for it. That would make me a hypocrite." The room went silent. Ray hadn't expected this. He'd spent 12 years imagining this confrontation. In every version, Frank came for revenge. But this wasn't revenge. This was something else. "Then why are you here?" Ray asked. Frank stood up slowly. He reached into his coat pocket. Ray's hand moved to his gun, but Frank just pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the coffee table. "Open it." Ray picked up the envelope. Inside were photographs, Him leaving his apartment, him at work, him at the grocery store. Dozens of photos spanning months, maybe years. "I've known where you were for 6 years," Frank said. "I've known your routine, your schedule, where you eat, where you sleep. I could have ended this any time." Ray's hands were shaking now. "Why didn't you?" "Because I wanted to see if you were happy. I wanted to see if betraying me, if destroying everything we built, if living in fear for 12 years was worth it." Frank walked to the window, looked out at the city lights. "And what I saw was a man in a prison without walls. You're not living, Ray. You're just surviving. And I realized something. Killing you would be mercy. Letting you live like this, that's the real punishment." Frank turned back to face Ray. "So here's what I'm going to do. Nothing. I'm walking out that door. I'm going back to my life, and you're going to stay in yours. But now you'll know that I found you, that I could have killed you, that I chose not to." He started walking toward the door. "And every single day for the rest of your life, you're going to remember this conversation. You're going to remember that Frank Lucas had you, and he let you go. And you're going to ask yourself the same question I've been asking for 6 years." Frank paused at the door, his hand on the knob. Was it worth it? He walked out. The door closed. Ray stood there in his empty apartment, holding those photographs. And for the first time in 12 years, he let himself cry. Frank Lucas never contacted Ray Barnes again, never sent anyone after him, never made another move. And that, somehow, was worse than any revenge Frank could have taken. Because Ray spent the rest of his life, another 23 years, looking over his shoulder, wondering if today would be the day Frank changed his mind, wondering if that car following him was surveillance or something darker, wondering if every phone call was a warning. Ray Barnes died in 2010. Heart attack. Alone in his apartment. The coroner found him 3 days later. No family, no friends. No one who knew his real name. Frank Lucas outlived him by 9 years. When someone asked Frank about Ray Barnes in an interview years later, Frank just smiled. "Ray thought I was going to kill him, but I didn't have to. He killed himself the day he testified. He just didn't know it yet." If this story about betrayal, mercy, and the prison without walls hit you, smash that subscribe button. We're telling the Frank Lucas stories that history forgot. The choices that haunted him, the code that defined him. Drop a like if you think Frank made the right call, and in the comments, what would you have done in Ray's position? More legendary stories coming next. Don't miss it.